they thought they'd won. They believed you'd stay quiet forever, that they could bend your truth, control your emotions, and you'd keep dancing like a puppet in their theater of lies. But then, something they never expected happened. You woke up. You don't need revenge. You don't need to scream. All you need is to do the one thing they fear most. Choose yourself, fully, relentlessly, silent. In this video, you're going to discover 10 powerful, deeply cutting strategies that destroy a cruel narcissist without a single scream or fight, just through boundaries, emotional control, and silence that burns louder than any words. They won't understand why you stopped reacting. They'll panic when their hooks no longer reach you, and they'll despise the truth that you're now boring to them, not because you've dimmed, but because you've stopped being a supporting character in their twisted script. This isn't just another video, it's a tactical blueprint to break their grip, calmly, consciously, and with zero apology. And the final tactic, 10, is the one they're never ready for. Watch till the end, because the real power isn't in what you say, it's in what you finally choose not to say. If they ever made you feel small, today we take it all back. Subscribe now, because freedom begins with a choice, and you've just made yours. Part 1. Uncompromising silence. They're not afraid of your anger. They're not shaken by your long emotional texts, your tears, or your midnight calls begging to be heard. In fact, they thrive on it. Every reaction you give is proof to them they still have power. That's why the first move, and the one that throws them off the most, isn't confrontation, it's silence. Not passive silence, not sulking or giving the cold shoulder. This is intentional. Unwavering silence, so grounded, so resolute, that it shakes the very illusion of control they thought they had over you. When you stop texting, stop explaining, stop feeding into the psychological game, they lose their grip. At first, they'll misread it. They'll think you're playing hard to get. Then they'll expect a backlash. But as the days pass and your voice remains absent, they start to feel something unfamiliar. Emptiness. A void where their favorite target used to be. Your silence doesn't just confuse them, it terrifies them. Because in your silence, you send a message louder than any outburst could ever scream. I no longer need you to define my worth. That's a truth a narcissist never wants to face, spoken or unspoken. You used to be their emotional supply. Now you're the slammed door. No noise, no warning, just finality. And here's what hurts them most. It's not that you left. It's that you left without saying a word. They'll scramble for your attention. They'll flip the script, playing victim, offering fake apologies, acting confused or even affectionate. Sometimes they'll say something cruel just to bait a response. But if you understand this one truth, that silence is not weakness but strategy, then you won't fall for it. You won't take the bait. And your calm, consistent non-reaction, that's a blow they never prepared for. In that silence, you are healing. You are resetting your value system, reclaiming every piece of yourself they once chipped away. Each day you don't message them, check their social media, or re-engage in the drama is a day you regain your autonomy. You may feel shaky, you may feel empty, but don't confuse that discomfort with a mistake. What you're feeling is your nervous system learning to live without chaos, and that's what strength feels like at first. Unfamiliar, but necessary. Remember, a narcissist cannot manipulate someone who does not react. They can't play their game if you're no longer on the field. The quieter you become, the more lost they feel. When they can't predict your next move, they start losing control. Silence is not retreat. Silence is a conscious decision, a decision that says, I will no longer drain myself to keep someone else emotionally fed. That's the first tactic, and it's the foundation of everything that follows. Because when you go silent, you're not just closing a door. You're shutting down the entire stage they used to perform on. Part 2. Non-negotiable boundaries. After you've chosen silence, intentional, clear, and unwavering, the next move is to draw boundaries they cannot bargain with. This isn't polite firmness, this is a declaration. I no longer live under your control. Narcissists hate boundaries, because boundaries mean the loss of power, the loss of access to your emotions, your time, your attention. In their world, vagueness is a weapon, and blurred lines are a doorway. But when you start erecting walls, clear, firm, and unapologetic, they begin to panic. When someone gets angry at your boundaries, it's a sign they were benefiting from you having none. Dr. Nidra Glover Tawwab, therapist and author of Set Boundaries, Find Peace. You may have once believed that setting limits was selfish, but in truth it's the most basic protection your spirit deserves. It's the message, I will no longer let anyone trespass into my peace. They will test you. They'll call you cold, difficult, or arrogant. They'll press your guilt buttons to get you to fold. But here's the shift. Every time you don't react the way you used to, every time you refuse to explain yourself, you're reclaiming sovereignty over your life. Setting boundaries isn't about yelling at them. It's about not picking up the phone when you already said, I don't take calls after 9 p.m. It's about not replying when you've stated, I'm not discussing this anymore. It's about refusing to play a game that always ends in your pain. And most importantly, it's about keeping your word. You don't reinforce a boundary with repetition. You reinforce it with consistent action. Every time you hold the line you drew, you're rewriting the rules. And in this new rulebook, they no longer get to manipulate the outcome. At times, guilt may creep in. You may feel like you're being too harsh. That's because you've been conditioned to prioritize other people's comfort over your own peace. But that conditioning is fading now. You are choosing clarity over chaos. You are choosing peace over fake approval. And you're telling yourself every single day, I deserve respect, even from myself. When you set a boundary, you don't need their apology. You don't need them to validate your pain, because by then you've realized you don't need anything from them anymore. Boundaries are a silent message, but they speak volumes. I am no longer your emotional playground. And that's what drives them mad, not because you hate them, but because they're no longer the main character in your story. You're rewriting the script, you're clearing the stage. And now, if they want to enter your world, they need to knock. And you, my friend, have every right not to open the door. Part 3. Strategic Indifference. After silence and clear boundaries, one of the most powerful transformations you can make to break a narcissist control is to become intentionally uninteresting. Yes, this isn't about being cold or detached. It's about emotional mastery so complete that they can no longer find anything to manipulate. Narcissists don't just crave attention. They feed on your emotional volatility like oxygen. Tears one day, rage the next, confusion the day after. They create chaos only to swoop in as the savior, even though they're the ones who lit the fire. What they truly need is for you to still care, even if that care is expressed through pain. But what happens when you stop reacting? When you answer their provocation with a flat okay? When you don't ask, why did you disappear? When you don't fight back when they blame you? They begin to panic, because now you're unpredictable. They don't know what you're thinking. They can't forecast your next move, and that makes them feel invisible, something they hate more than anything. Your indifference isn't lack of emotion. It's a conscious decision to protect your emotional energy. It's when you see the insult and let it bounce off. It's when you hear the fake apology and don't let your heart get hooked. You no longer feel the need to win the argument. You no longer need to prove your truth. You know who you are now, and they no longer get to be the judge of your worth. When you become boring to a narcissist, offering no emotional highs or lows, you're essentially pulling the plug on their manipulation machine. They'll try to pull you back in. Sweet talk, guilt, provocation, nostalgia. But when you keep holding that wall of calm indifference, they quickly realize you've stepped out of their reach. And when they can't bait you into emotional chaos anymore, they lose power. Indifference doesn't mean you don't feel pain. You might still be hurting inside, but you choose not to let that pain become the gateway they use to crawl back in. You wear your calm like invisible armor. This isn't a game. This is a survival strategy. When you no longer show your wounds, your anger, or your desire to be understood, you make them irrelevant. You begin to channel that energy into what actually matters: deep sleep, meaningful work, healthy relationships, and most importantly, yourself. And day by day you become invisible in their world, just as they once made you feel in their relationship. But this time, it's your choice. Not because you're weak, but because you've become untouchable. No arguments, no drama, just sharp stillness, like a river that has stopped flowing in their direction. Part 4. The Truth Bomb. After silence, firm boundaries, and strategic indifference, there comes a moment when you're not doing it for them anymore, you're doing it for yourself. It's time to speak the truth, not to argue, not to convince, not to win, but to release. Narcissists live in the dark. They thrive in the grey areas where facts get blurry and memories are rewritten. They manipulate by denying your reality, flipping the script, and painting you as the problem in the story they designed. But when you stand up and say, "That was abuse, that was manipulation, I was controlled and now I see it clearly," you're burning down the curtain they used to hide behind. And you're not doing it hoping for remorse, because they won't give it. You speak the truth to sever the last tie, the one that still hoped they'd someday acknowledge your pain. They'll try to twist your words, say you're too sensitive, accuse you of exaggerating. They'll attempt to rewrite the script. But the truth, once spoken with calm clarity, doesn't need their permission to be valid. You don't need to scream. You don't need to post pages of explanation. Sometimes a single sentence is enough. "I know what happened, and I'm not staying silent anymore." And then you walk away. No dramatic exit, no final showdown, no last conversation, because closure doesn't come from their mouth, it comes from your decision to stop needing it. Here's the hard but liberating truth. Narcissists aren't afraid of being hated. They're afraid of being exposed. They fear you telling the real story, not with drama, but with truth. When you speak up, not with bitterness, but with grounded conviction, you don't just reclaim your voice, you reclaim reality. You stop protecting their image. You stop lying to keep the peace. You stop sugarcoating the story just to make others more comfortable. And in that moment, you step out of the silent victim role. You become the witness, the survivor, the narrator of your own truth. Truth is medicine, bitter but healing. You don't need to repeat it. You don't need to scream it. You just need to speak it once from a place of strength, then close the door that should have been closed long ago. And when you do that, you free yourself from the lie that healing depends on being understood by the one who broke you. You understand you, and that's enough. Part 5. The Silent Goodbye. Not everyone deserves a goodbye, especially not those who've repeatedly twisted the truth, played with your emotions, and turned your forgiveness into a revolving door for control. Some relationships don't need a neat conclusion. They just need a clean exit. No explanations, no warnings, no turning back. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do to a narcissist is disappear quietly, without a reaction, leaving behind no trace of emotion for them to feed on. Narcissists survive on connection, not real connection, but dependency. They need you to stay, not out of love, but because you're their emotional supply, a target for blame, a puppet for control, a mirror for their power. When you leave without leaving a way back, they lose their grip, and for them, That loss is an internal collapse. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to leave a long message, just silence. Your absence from their chaos is enough to create a void louder than any words ever could. In that silence, they'll be forced to confront what they fear most, themselves. No one to blame, no one to bait, no one to respond to their game. And for a narcissist, that is the cruelest punishment, being made invisible. You may have thought you needed a final talk, that you owed them an explanation, that maybe, just maybe, they'd understand. But now you know they never really will. And continuing to seek validation from the one who shattered you only prolongs your pain. You don't need their confirmation. What you need is release. Walking away without saying goodbye is not avoidance. It's a conscious choice, a declaration of strength. It's the moment you realize that staying only shrinks you and that leaving is not weakness. It's quiet victory. A victory that no one needs to recognize but you. You might feel cruel, but remember, kindness does not mean setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You've given them too many chances. Forgiven beyond your limits, tried beyond your capacity. Now you choose yourself. By walking away, cutting the cord and letting silence speak the words that speech cannot. When you stop texting, stop answering, stop reopening the door they once wandered through so freely, they lose direction. They'll try everything to pull you back in, apologies, guilt, provocation, or even retaliatory silence. But if you stand firm, if you keep that door closed, eventually they'll realize the game is over. And when you disappear, not to punish them, but to protect yourself, you're sending the clearest message of all. I am no longer a victim. I am the one who walked out of the story you tried to trap me in. Part 6. When they realize you're no longer afraid. There's one thing that shakes a narcissist more than silence, more than boundaries, and more than a goodbye without closure. It's the moment they realize you're no longer afraid of them. You're no longer afraid of being abandoned, no longer afraid of being misunderstood, no longer afraid of being called too sensitive, too dramatic, or hard to love. When fear is no longer the thing that keeps you in their game, they know they've officially lost the lead role in your life. Narcissists rely on your fear to manipulate, fear of losing them, fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being alone. That fear made you stay quiet when they disrespected you. It made you apologize for their mistakes. It made you return even when you knew you deserved better. But when you start acting from self-respect, from clarity, from growth, not fear, you completely rewrite the rules. That's when they lose all anchors. They throw provocations. You don't react. They offer false tenderness. You don't melt. They paint loneliness as your future, but you remain unmoved. And suddenly, what they used to control you becomes powerless. You're no longer shaken by their silence, no longer lose sleep over unread messages, no longer agonize over their shifting moods. You now understand something you once feared to believe, that you can live without them, that you don't need their understanding to feel valid, that you don't have to shrink to fit into the emotional maze they once built around you. When you stop fearing them, you begin to speak truth. Not out of rage, but because you no longer need their permission. You set boundaries, not as threats, but as protection. You don't respond to disrespectful texts. You don't enter conversations where you have to justify your own feelings. And that terrifies them. Because now, you're no longer predictable, pliable, or programmable. You've become a new version, strong, aware, and free, and they know that once you reach that state, they've lost you forever. There's no tactic left, no words sharp enough. They didn't lose you because you disappeared. They lost you because you stood up and looked them in the eye with a calm so steady they no longer existed in your world. When the fear of their rejection no longer makes you compromise, you reclaim every part of your life they once controlled. You start living by what's right for you, not what they approve of. You know their silence doesn't define you. Their detachment doesn't diminish your worth. and you stop trying to prove you're worthy, because you finally know you've always been worthy, even if they never had the courage to admit it. Part 7. When you no longer seek their validation. As long as you need them to understand, to admit they were wrong, to offer a genuine apology, you're still emotionally tied to them. You might have left physically, but emotionally, you're still standing outside that door, knocking gently, hoping someone inside will finally open their heart. And the narcissist, they know that. They know you haven't fully broken free, as long as you're still waiting for something from them, an explanation, an "I'm sorry," a sign they've changed. But when that moment never comes, and you stop waiting for it, that's when you truly begin to heal. You no longer need them to acknowledge what they did. You don't need them to name the abuse. You don't need them to bow their head in regret, because you've risen above the need for that. You don't need them to validate that you were kind, that you loved deeply, that you gave more than you got. You know all of that is true, even if they never admit it. And when you stop seeking their validation, you feel lighter. You no longer lie awake thinking, "I should have said it differently," or "maybe if I had acted another way they'd understand." You stop obsessing over the what-ifs, because you realize you can't force someone to understand what they refuse to see. You can't force someone to respect the truth if the truth threatens the illusion they cling to. And you can't force someone to feel your pain when they deny their own. When you release the need for their validation, you start rebuilding your life from within. You return to the things you had forgotten, a small passion, a big dream, a piece of yourself you abandoned because you were once told it was too much, too weak, too inconvenient. You begin to trust your own voice again, instead of letting theirs define your worth. And when you no longer need anyone to affirm that you're enough, you become uncontrollable in the way they once controlled you. You stop looking for answers outside. You've come home to yourself. And there you find steadiness, not because someone else validates you, but because you validate you. Narcissists don't know what to do with that. When you stop trying to make them understand, when you stop sending clarifying texts, when you stop reacting to their smearing or narrative spinning, they have nothing left to hook into. No angle for victimhood, no stage for their performance. Because you, the only audience that ever gave them light, have left the building. And in that moment, something beautiful happens. You no longer heal to prove anything to anyone. You heal for yourself. You go on walks without posting about it. You laugh without needing someone to witness it. You live, truly live, without an audience. And that's when your recovery transforms from effort into essence. It becomes who you are, not something you're trying to achieve. You don't need them to look back because you've already looked inward, clearly, fully, and undeniably. Part 8. When they realize you've stepped out of the victim role. When a narcissist realizes you're no longer the perfect victim they once depended on, the collapse begins, not within you, but within them. Because every manipulation, every control tactic, every script they used now falls flat. You're no longer the person who anxiously wonders why they've gone cold. No longer the one who feels guilty when they pretend to be hurt. No longer the one who lowers their head when they raise their voice. You stand tall, look them in the eye, and you don't react the way they expect anymore. They start recycling old tricks, playing the victim, accidentally, bringing up happy memories, then shifting into smearing or pretending to be your savior. But you don't fall into any of it, because now you no longer need to be accepted. You're no longer trying to save the relationship. And most importantly, you've revoked your consent for the role they once cast you in, the powerless one. You begin to see them not as someone who loved you, but as someone who manipulated you. You no longer excuse their behavior as clumsy or wounded, but recognize it as a deliberate pattern designed to serve them, unchanged and unchanging. When you step out of the victim role, you don't become the villain. You become uncontrollable. You no longer play the game. And because of that, they no longer know how to move their pieces. In their mind, you were once predictable. Stir up chaos and you'd make peace. Go silent and you'd break first. Push you away and you'd come running back. But now, you do nothing. No reaction, no explanation, no retreat. And that doesn't make you cold. It makes you dangerously grounded in their eyes. Because what gives a narcissist power is their ability to steer your emotions. When you no longer ride their emotional roller coaster, they lose the map. And when they can no longer make you feel guilty, worthless, or not enough, they lose the mirror they relied on to feel important. When you exit the victim role, you don't need to declare, "I'm strong now." Your strength is obvious in the fact that you no longer need to prove it. You're not fighting to win arguments. You're not chasing validation. You're simply moving forward on a path where their voice no longer narrates your choices, where their presence no longer factors into your daily peace. And in that space, you don't just reclaim freedom, you reclaim authorship, a new storyline, where you're no longer labeled as too emotional, too naive, or too forgiving. You are the survivor, the awakened one, the boundary setter, the one who understands and forgives, not for their sake, but for your own. When they realize you've left the role, they'll get confused, they might rage, they might try to reboot the entire cycle. But there's nothing that can pull you back anymore, because the victim script only works when you stay on stage. And now you've stepped off. No applause, no curtain, no need for a final bow. Part 9. When they realize you've truly moved on. Pain brought you down, but healing made you rise. Not to go back and fight, but to walk away for good. There's a moment a narcissist is never prepared to face, and it's this. You've truly moved on. No more resentment, no more waiting, no more curiosity about how they're doing or whether they regret what they did. You no longer look for signs from their world, because it no longer has anything to do with yours. This isn't denial, it's not defensive detachment, it's real peace. The kind that lets you look back at what happened without the sting, as if turning the page of a chapter that was painful but closed. They were once a major part of your story, but now that chapter is sealed, and you no longer reread the last sentence wondering if it's okay to continue. Narcissists always believe you'll come back, if not physically, then mentally. They expect the silent reaction, a glance at their social media, a cryptic status, a sadness in your eyes when you accidentally cross paths. But when none of that happens, when you are genuinely silent, truly at peace, no anger, no hatred, just a complete absence of their presence in your mental space, that's when they feel their deepest defeat. They might say you're arrogant, cold, ungrateful. They might try to provoke you, pull you back into the familiar game, but nothing works, because you've gone too far. You've outgrown the reach, and no one can drag you back once you've tasted the value of peace. You don't need them to pay. You don't need the universe to balance the scales, because you now understand that the peace you live in every single day is already the justice you once hoped for, not against them, but for yourself, after everything you've endured. You chose healing, not to prove anything, but because you deserve to breathe freely, and when you've truly moved on, you begin building a life they wouldn't even recognize. No more panic behind your eyes, no more apologizing for your feelings, no more shrinking your truth to make others comfortable. Instead, there is a new version of you. Calm, clear, aware of where you begin and where your boundaries firmly stand. You laugh, not to hide pain, but because you are truly alive. You love, not to fill a void, but because your heart is no longer held hostage by fear. You are calm, not because you don't feel, but because your emotions are no longer manipulated by someone unworthy. When they realize you've moved on, they also realize they've lost something they'll never get back. Someone who once loved them deeply, honestly, and is now choosing themselves instead. And the most bitter truth for a narcissist isn't being hated, it's being forgotten. not because you're trying to erase them, but because they simply no longer hold any role in your life. Part 10. When they realize they no longer have any power over you. There is no blow more painful to a narcissist than realizing this. They no longer have the ability to make you feel anything. Not anger, not hurt, not anxiety, hope, or even hatred. You're not cold, you're simply no longer entangled. And for someone who lived by controlling other people's emotions, being unable to affect you is the most devastating punishment. When they manipulate, they expect a reaction. When they go silent, they expect you to panic. When they return, they expect confusion and hesitation. But now, every signal they send lands in a void. There's no one on the other end to respond, no target for the game to continue. And when they realize this, a terrifying emptiness begins to open inside them. You don't speak up, you don't explain, you don't retaliate, you just go on living. You don't post cryptic messages, you don't update your status to show you're doing great. You don't try to look strong for their eyes, because you have nothing left to prove, especially to them. When they message you, you don't reply. When they poke around through mutual contacts, you don't respond. When they create drama, you simply don't enter it, and that, to them, is unbearable. They were once the center of your emotional universe, the reason you tossed and turned at night, the name your eyes scanned the crowd for, but now, they're just a blank space, a space you no longer feel the need to fill. Nothing sends a narcissist into crisis like being unable to trigger emotion in you. They can no longer read your mind, no longer twist your narrative, no longer shape the way you see yourself. You've unplugged the last cord, the one that kept them feeling like they still had a place inside you, and you've done it not in rage, but in absolute stillness. No cruel words, no public verdict, just a quiet refusal to let them into your mental space ever again. That's when they understand that every manipulation from now on is meaningless. They can play their roles, show up accidentally, rewrite the story, tell others you were the problem, but you're unmoved. And they cannot stand that truth. You've moved beyond their reach, completely. No more control, no more influence, no more place. They didn't just lose you, they lost the mirror that once made them feel significant. And for an ego that feeds on being reflected back by others, this invisibility is a failure they don't know how to name. You don't need to witness their breakdown. You don't need an admission from them. You simply keep walking, past their world as if you never paused in it, no glancing back, no emotional residue. Because you know, true freedom isn't about how much pain they feel. It's about the fact that they no longer have the power to make you feel anything at all. You didn't rewrite the past, but you rewrote the way you walked out of it. Not with tears, not with screaming matches or raging revenge, but with the calm of someone who finally understood. I don't need their validation to have value. I don't need a happy ending to keep living. And from that moment, the real journey began. Your silence wasn't surrender. It was a declaration that you will no longer waste energy on someone who no longer deserves to be mentioned. The boundaries you set weren't to control anyone, but to protect the most precious thing, your inner peace. Your indifference wasn't an act. It was the result of a long road you walked. From dependency to freedom, from confusion to clarity, from being controlled to becoming self-directed. No one may ever fully understand what you went through, how many silent nights you cried, how deeply you doubted yourself, how much you twisted your own truth just to keep someone else comfortable. But you know, and you're still here, strong, grounded, whole. You no longer need justice from their hands, because true justice is knowing you no longer need them in your life to feel peace. You no longer ask, why did they do this to me? You begin to ask, how can I build a life where that pain no longer defines me? And then you find the answer, not outside, but within. Every choice you now make for yourself, every word you hold back to avoid falling into emotional traps, every morning you wake up and choose to keep going is proof you came home to yourself. No one controls your mood through their silence anymore. No one manipulates you with guilt. No one makes you shrink in order to be loved. And that didn't happen overnight, but from the small, quiet acts of defiance you repeated each time you chose not to look back. Healing is not a destination. It's a decision you recommit to every single day. And even on the days you still feel pain, still feel vulnerable, still want to understand why, you don't shame yourself anymore. You know that healing is an act of courage, not a pursuit of perfection. You didn't win by retaliating. You won by removing them from the narrative altogether. And true freedom wasn't about making them hurt. It was about no longer needing their pain for your life to begin again. And if you're still reading this, know one thing. You've come so far, farther than they ever expected you to, beyond fear, beyond control, so far that you are no longer the same person. You are yourself now, powerful, clear, and full of love, but this time that love is yours to give to yourself first.